This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Terry McNulty, one of the new generation of faculty here at the college. You've been at Middlesex how long now?
I've been at Middlesex, I'm starting my third year now.
And it's the best job you've ever had?
By far, the best job I've ever had. There's no question about it.
Okay. Actually, why?
For a lot of different reasons. I've been teaching for 10 years, and I've taught a lot of different places in those 10 years, but the thing that makes this place great for me is the commitment that I find from my colleagues and the commitment that I find from my students. And in all the places I've taught, there's always been commitment from everyone, but not to the same degree that I found here. And I find that at MxCC there's sort of a common belief in education as sort of mission-driven, that we're in this not just for ourselves or for our students, but for something larger. And that's, having that common feeling among people is pretty fantastic.
Yeah. Would you find that at most community colleges, or is that unique to some?
I'm not sure. This is the only community college where I've taught. I've taught at all sorts of different institutions, and I can say that I haven't found that to the same degree or to the same depth that I found it here.
Talk a bit about the student commitment. That's good to hear.
Well, we hear a lot about teachers. A teacher is only as good as their students, as only as good as their students are willing to work, I guess I should say.
Right.
And at MxCC, I've come across some really remarkable people who are committed to bettering themselves in a whole bunch of ways, but also academically. And that's what it's about. It's about that intrinsic motivation.
So anyone who comes to Middlesex would find, as a student, would find people in the classroom who are really committed to learning? Am I putting words in your mouth?
Well, no. I think that's true. Like any other place, you're going to find a mixture of students. But yeah, you're going to find a whole bunch of students who want to do the very best that they can do.
This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and this is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Terry McNulty, who's taught English at Middlesex Community College for about 3 years.
That's right.
And looks like you're going to be teaching in a community college for a long, long time, I hope.
That's my hope too, yeah.
I hope so. I really do. What's the best preparation for teaching in a community college?
I think there's a whole bunch of ways that one can become prepared to teach at a community college. In a lot of ways, I think it's about mindset. It's about what approach you bring to the classroom. If you're patient and if you are focused more on perhaps the success of others than the success of yourself, then you're going to succeed as a teacher at a community college. It's really about, I think, having that sort of other-centered mindset that makes a difference.
I think you just said something really important about teaching, frankly, any place, whether it's graduate school or kindergarten, being focused on others and not just being the stereotypical professor who likes to hear himself talk.
Right.
Which is what I'm sure both of us suffered from not too often, I hope, but occasionally in graduate school in particular.
Sure.
Where did you get that idea from?
Well, I was, as an undergraduate, I was a double major in English and philosophy. And I spent a lot of time reading stuff by Martin Buber and Emmanuel Levinas, and ethicists who really focused on the importance of the other person and sort of the insignificance of the self. And when I first started teaching, I'm not sure I really had that mindset, but as I became more of a professional teacher, as I sort of figured out what I was doing in my job, it dawned on me that I could really take this philosophy that I believed in and apply it in a living way. And I think that's where it came from.
So can you imagine Martin Buber as a teacher? He was.
Yeah, yes and no. I can imagine him as a teacher in that I feel in reading so much of what he's written, he's taught me so much. But when I think about my own classrooms, the classroom I run is a very different kind of classroom than the classroom I would expect Martin Buber to run. I always
So describe your classroom. If I wandered in as a student, what does it look like? What goes on there?
I know a class is going well when there's a spirit of goodwill amongst everyone in the room, there's a precise focus on a task, and there's laughter. If I've got those three things...
Say them again.
If there's a spirit of goodwill,
yeah.
a precise focus on a task,
some people would call that hard work.
Yeah, hard work, focus,
yeah.
and laughter. If I have those three things, I can accomplish a lot, and my students will accomplish a whole lot. When any of those three things are missing, it gets a little slipperier, and on a bad day, well, maybe we don't quite accomplish as much.
Now, as you went through public schools and college and graduate school and all that, did you have some teachers who modeled that?
It's hard for me.
Or did you have to figure it out for yourself?
I think a lot of that I figured out for myself. I mean, I did spend a lot of time in collaborative classrooms, especially in graduate school. I spent a lot of time in collaborative classrooms. And I think that I can think of a couple of specific teachers who taught me the value of laughter in the classroom. But a lot of what I do, I've sort of invented over time. As I've seized on, in my 10 years of teaching, as I've sort of seized on things that worked and let go of things that didn't work. That's where it's come from.
Tell me about something that didn't work.
There's a million things that don't work. The greatest thing for me, and I think for some instructors this works very well in the classroom, but for me the greatest thing that doesn't work is a full class lecture.
Mm-hmm.
I try to structure my classes where I give a mini lesson up front, followed by an application exercise, either individually or in small groups, followed by some sort of conversation about that, assessing what we got, what we didn't get. When I try to just go straight lecture, and I don't have a built-in way to figure out if my students are getting it or not getting it during the class, and the students don't have a way to practice it during the class, it falls apart for me.
So how do you deal with a student, there must be some, student who comes in a little sleepy, maybe they've been working, maybe they've been enjoying themselves too much, they haven't done their homework, they sit at the back, they look out the window. This is not a typical student at Middlesex, but there must be one or two. How do you engage them? How do you get them?
It's such a difficult question because if there were one way to do it, it would be so easy. Every student has an individual situation with individual needs and individual problems. My usual approach in a situation like that is to tease somebody. If I know, and I gauge pretty early in the semester if somebody can take a joke, if I can poke somebody a little bit verbally, if I can make somebody crack a smile, and then I can get them into a small group with other students who are really focused and we're going to pull them along, that's usually going to work.
Now, are they able to kid you as well?
Absolutely. I try not to take myself, I pretend to try not to take myself too seriously. How's that?
And how do you think your teaching today is different from the very first week when you started teaching?
I remember my first class.
Oh dear.
The first
Something's
class I ever
coming.
taught. I didn't know. It was the first class I ever taught. I was 22 years old.
Was this high school or college?
This was college at the University of Maine. I was a teaching assistant. No clue what I was doing. It was English 101. And I put a podium in front of myself, and I grabbed onto that podium.
And how many people were in the room?
About 30 people in the room.
Okay.
And I didn't let go of the podium until the 50 minutes were over, and I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what I taught or did, and it was terrible. Since then, I've learned so much.
I'll guarantee you one thing.
Yeah.
Nobody among those 30 remembers this, but you do, right?
That's probably, I hope that's true.
Yeah.
I hope that's true. I think that what I've learned over time is that the classroom isn't about me. It's really not. I might come in with a lesson. I do come in with a lesson plan, but in the end, it's not about me on stage. It's about what the students are doing in the 80 minutes that they're in the room. What they're hearing from me, what they're doing together, and what they're teaching each other.
And how do you measure whether they've learned anything? I mean, it might be fun and it might be engaging, but they might be learning nothing, I suppose.
Yeah.
How do you know whether they've learned something?
There's so many different ways. The sort of broadest way is by when I have small groups going, floating between the small groups and listening in and questioning as the students are working. That's one way. Second, after we would do some sort of application lesson, we'll have a conversation in the classroom about, we'll share what we learned, what we worked on in small groups, but what we sort of are understanding and not understanding. And then, just in case something's sort of left out, in a lot of classes I'll do an exit ticket exercise where the students can't leave the room at the end of class until they write down, for one, what they've learned that day, and then two, what they still don't understand. And that gives me a sense of...
And you go through that
Yep.
Between class, okay.
Yep. And so by the next class I've gone through all that, and I'll be able to see what did they get the lesson, one, and then two, what are they still confused about, and that gives me a starting point for the next lesson.
Now, when you first came here 3 years ago, came here to Middlesex Community College, obviously there were some faculty who were much, much older than you, more experienced. Were they puzzled by your style? Were they questioning about it? Were they supportive? Can you generalize?
I think for the most part I found great support. I think that one of the strengths of Middlesex is the diversity of approaches that instructors bring to the classroom. So students who do succeed in more straight lecture environments, those are here, if those students prefer those kinds of classes. Mm-hmm. If students work better socially or in collaboration, my class is a great fit for those students. I think that...
But most students probably don't even know which they're most comfortable with when they start.
That's right. And also they may not know who is using or who sort of engages in which style, which is why advising becomes so important for new students as well, and for continuing students too.
Now, do you have a lot of part-time students in your classes?
There's a good mixture, yeah.
So anyone who's listening and is kind of intrigued could maybe come along and shadow you for a day, or
sure,
before enrolling and paying their ill-gotten gains as tuition.
Absolutely. You know, I'm happy to have someone sit in on a class, or I'm happy to have someone just come see what it's all about. Sure, the door's always open, even if it's closed. It's open.
I understand. I hope our listeners understand. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and we'll be back momentarily. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Terry McNulty, a hotshot English teacher with all the best modern methods, who's been at Middlesex for 3 years?
3 years.
Now, I have a crib sheet in front of me. I have your resume in front of me. And I see you went to the University of Scranton. Now, for your bachelor's, were you reading Martin Buber and philosophy at that time?
I was, yeah.
Wow. I'm impressed. What got you into... This is not easy reading. I mean, what got you into Martin Buber at that time?
Well, the University of Scranton is a Jesuit university.
Right.
And I was in a program there.
It's even more difficult to understand. Martin Buber was Jewish.
That's right.
Okay.
I was in a program there that was specially designed for students who had an interest in philosophy, the SJLA program. And I probably never would have picked up Buber on my own, or Levinas on my own, or certainly I never would have picked up Heidegger on my own. But being guided through this program was where I did most of my, at the time, what I thought was my deep reading in philosophy. And I have to tell you, it changed my life. It helped me find a center that I never really expected before.
Now, did you have you were, 18 or whatever at the time. Did you have the skills, the English skills, to read that kind of stuff?
Yes and no. I mean, vocabulary in philosophy, there's so many words that are sort of proprietary to a given philosopher that you can't necessarily expect the vocabulary to be there. I was able to isolate main idea from supporting detail, but I wasn't always able to recognize...
So you were well taught in high school?
Yes, I was. But it was still very difficult to read. The lowest grades I got in college were in philosophy classes.
So how do you deal with... we have so many students who are smart. They may not think they're smart, but they are really smart. But perhaps they haven't had all the teaching that they should have had, and, they're lacking some things. But they're smart.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach that kind of stuff?
Well, because I think of education as sort of collaborative, one of the best things I'm able to do as a teacher is to recognize that very often many of the students in the room are smarter than I am. I have the experience advantage oftentimes, but most of my students are smarter than I am. So if there are skills missing, then what we really try to do is identify the given skill set that's missing for a student and use that as a base for teaching. So for example, in teaching reading, if I have a reading class where everybody's got main idea, then we'll do it a little bit, but we're not going to focus on it very much. Whereas if 2/3 of my class is really struggling with supporting details, we're going to spend a lot of time on that. I don't try to take last semester's syllabus and impose it on the next semester's syllabus.
So let me go back a minute. You say that many of your students are smarter than you are, and I think I understand what you mean. But they don't believe that, do they?
No, most oftentimes they don't.
How do you get them to have the self-confidence, not that they're cocky and say, oh, I'm smarter than you, I don't mean that kind of attitude, but how do you get them to the point where they have confidence that they may not have the skills yet, but they've got a brain?
I think a big part of it is being really honest and straightforward with a student on where they stand, both grade-wise and skill-wise. So if a student comes in lacking a specific skill, I'm going to talk to them about what they're missing. Mm-hmm. And if the work that they're doing is developing that skill, I'm going to show them, I'm not just going to tell them that, I'm going to show them how it's being developed. And if there's a back step and the work is not up to par as it was in the previous assignment, we're going to talk about that too.
I have met so many students in community colleges who are very smart and who don't quite believe it.
Yeah.
And once they get past that, once they begin to believe in themselves, it's amazing how fast they can learn. And then they can read your Martin Buber or whatever it is.
That's right.
Probably in the original German. Did you read it in the original German?
I did not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. No.
Is that an ambition at some point?
Languages, I'm okay with languages, but probably not. Probably not Buber in German. No.
Now, what languages are you okay with? Apart from English.
Well, English, I'm okay with English, and I'm pretty good with Spanish. But I've done a little bit of French, a little bit of Italian, but I haven't pushed myself in either of those directions.
So you got your bachelor's at the University of Scranton. My guess is by that time you knew you were going to teach.
I didn't.
You didn't? Okay,
didn't.
I'm wrong. You went to the University of Maine.
I did.
At that time, what did you think you were going to do with your life?
When I went to the University of Maine, I was a writer. And I'd spent most of my time in Scranton writing, and I'd won awards as a writer. And I went to the University of Maine to do a master's in English and really focus on creative writing and keep writing. And it was there that I first taught. And it wasn't until I left the University of Maine and I was no longer a student, because I went to grad school straight after college, that I realized, all right, I better find myself a career. And then when I thought about what I'd done as a teacher, and I said, I did okay. And then I thought about how it sort of aligned with how I was trying to live my life ethically. It all sort of clicked in my head at that point. I was about 24 when I realized, I could do this.
Do you still see yourself as a writer?
I do. I don't have as much time to write.
Of course.
As I'd like.
I would hope not. You're teaching.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I also think that teaching and planning takes up the same compartment of my brain.
So what kinds of things do you write?
I write mostly poetry.
Do you write for a particular audience or for yourself? Or?
I write for myself. I'll send stuff out once in a while, but mostly I write for myself, and I'm writing out of a sort of avant-garde tradition over the last 30 years.
So it's dangerous to ask you the topic, the kinds of things you write about?
Yeah, because I don't really...
I wouldn't get it.
No, it's not that you wouldn't get it, I just don't write about things.
What can you describe what you write about?
Yeah, well, most of my writing is about the language itself. So I write a lot of stuff that is more a series of words strung together in an unexpected way, or words strung together in a way that causes friction or an unexpected idea to occur, than it is about any topic or object or idea.
So when you were at the University of Maine, you saw yourself as a writer.
I did.
Possibly a poor writer, not poor, I mean poor in terms of material goods.
Yeah.
And then you went to Brown University.
I did.
Was that to become more a teacher?
Yep.
Okay.
So I taught for 4 years in Elmira, New York, at Elmira College, and I didn't have any sort of certification, so I couldn't teach high school. And I went into a master's in teaching program at Brown that would give me certification and also really deepen my understanding of what it means to be a teacher. And it was an intense whirlwind year-long program where I taught a lot and learned a whole lot about teaching. And although I self-identified as a teacher before that, it was upon entering that program where I really said, here I go. Now I'm definitely a teacher.
Now, if you could make as much money, what little there is, if you could make as much money as a writer, as a teacher, do you know which direction you'd go?
Yeah, I think I would probably be a writer, but I think I would still be teaching. I can't imagine not. It's so wild to me at this point, but I can't imagine not teaching.
What do you mean by wild?
Well, when I first started out teaching, when I taught that first class, when I was holding that podium so tight, I never thought I could do that. Not only did I not think I could do it with my life, I didn't think I could do it, period. And now it's such an integral part of my identity. Even if I could subsist as a writer, I would still want to pick up a class.
Now, how long ago was the Elmira experience, teaching at Elmira?
I taught there from 2001 to 2005.
So it's fairly recent.
Yeah.
What's the major difference between Elmira and, say, Middlesex Community College?
You know, one thing that struck me about MxCC when I first got here, whether it's compared to Elmira or compared to other teaching experiences, is how supportive students are of each other. And I know I've talked a little bit about how this is a collegial place as an employee,
Mm-hmm.
but students are really supportive here. And I'll give you an example. I taught a public speaking class this past fall. A public speaking class is dangerous because everyone has to...
other people are speaking.
That's right,
Yes.
That's right. Everyone has to put themselves out there on stage, and,
Right.
and you have to take a risk as a student to take public speaking. And the way students pulled for each other and supported each other and listened to each other and gave head nods when someone was struggling, just a little bit of a nod to say,
That's
I hear you,
wonderful.
and,
Now, let's say we're back in front of this microphone in 25 years. You are a senior and sage senior professor at that point. I'm in my wheelchair. What's going to be different in your classrooms?
I think the greatest challenge that I'm going to face, or the greatest change that I'm going to have to adapt to as a teacher, is the continued emergence of technology. And I'm a technophile. I'm big into tech, and I use a lot of tech in my classrooms. But as students become more wired, and as the shape of education becomes more wired, I think it's going to have to really change the way that I approach what I do in the classroom.
Is it going to change the way you write poetry as well?
Yeah, I think it might. I think it could change the way we define what it means to be human. And education is essentially a humanistic endeavor, and writing for me is the same way, so absolutely.
Well, I absolutely look forward to coming back in 25 years, and if I can get the words out, that'll be fun. This has been Middlesex Moments. My guest has been Terry McNulty, Professor of English at Middlesex Community College. Take a look at our website, mxcc.comnet, 2 M's, comnet.edu. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College. Have a good day.